So, Newcastle Falcons are about to become Newcastle Red Bulls, and it's not a decision I like, really. I don't like Red Bulls being plastered on a team that are in the Falcons for quite a while. Obviously, they weren't Newcastle Falcons forever. They were an area in Newcastle previously under a different name. But I think that the Red Bulls name is so big, it's just off putting for me, having been a close admirer of Newcastle Falcons for a while. Um, I lived in Newcastle for a while from 2015 to 2018, and Newcastle Falcons were a nice part of that. They aren't the big team in the city, obviously, that's the football. But with the rugby, there's a fan base there that have known the club for a while, um, their whole livelihoods potentially, as the Falcons. And they changed to the Red Bulls just because that they're not as big a team as obviously Red Bull bought Leeds United. Um, in terms of branding, it's not that much of an issue. I just don't like the decision to do that. Obviously, Falcons won the Premiership in 1998 with Johnny Wilkinson and a host of other great players. And that will always be a Falcons victory, it will never be a Red Bulls victory. I just don't like the changing of the name from the Falcons to the Red Bulls. Now, that's the only thing I do dislike. I think there's a lot of positives from the acquisition of the club by Red Bull. Obviously, the Falcons were in complete disarray financially. They were really struggling. The owner was looking to sell. They're having to borrow money from other Premiership clubs just to be able to stay afloat for this season. Obviously, the Premiership has struggled a bit. They've obviously rebranded as well. But there used to be more teams in the league. Obviously, 3 of those teams disappeared. They didn't want that to happen with Falcons as well. The huge investment of money now means that there might be another competitive team in that league. And last year, Falcons were the only team that weren't. It makes it a 10 strong league of teams that could beat each other on the day. And it might help grow rugby union in the north. Obviously, it's a very strong centre for rugby league in England, but it might help the growth of rugby union, considering Sale Sharks is the only club that had been kind of flying that flag for a while with just how poor Newcastle Falcons have been for the past few seasons. But as I say, I fell in love with Newcastle Falcons whenever I lived in Newcastle. There's something just about the club. There's some community aspect, along with a lot of rugby union clubs at the highest level. There's that community that, especially in the Premiership and Championship, that you just feel. But look, as I say, I think there's so many positives. I think the money they can now spend to help the club, to help make them competitive again, to bring in players, to make sure they don't lose their key players, which they did last year, just to kind of keep the club afloat. I also think that within 5-6 years, especially if Steve Diamond gets them working and they bring in the players, they could win the league, which would be a phenomenal rise. Yeah, look, I think there's loads of positives. My only negative is the change of the name. But look, let me know what you think. I've been Brendan McGilligan. I thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your different opinions, and I'd love to discuss them with you. Just obviously be fair about them. I'm not going to say that I'm not entitled to have an opinion that you disagree with, but I'd love to be able to have a conversation with someone about it and get to know what the different view, if you do disagree. But look, as I say, I've been Brenton. Thank you very much for listening, and look forward to talking to you again.